Donald Trump understands full well how to build a business. He also knows how to punish one.
The White House blasting Harvard University.
President Trump continued his attacks on Harvard University.
President Trump is once again escalating his fight with Harvard.
Trump has at various times described Harvard as anti-Semitic, far left, a liberal mess filled with crazed and radicalized lunatics and troublemakers, spewing anger and hate and ripping the country apart. All his words. And over the last months, he has steadily applied increasing pressure on Harvard University, including this past weekend when he explained to reporters his lines of attack. First, on Harvard students.
We want a list of those foreign students, and we'll find out whether or not they're okay.
Secondly, attacking Harvard's finances.
We give them billions of dollars, which is ridiculous. We do grants, which we're probably not going to be doing much grants anymore to Harvard.
But there's a third line as well, a strike at Harvard's generational wealth itself, its $53 billion endowment nest egg.
It's shocking. It's deeply disturbing.
It's really feels like an all-out war, doesn't it?
It truly is unprecedented.
Let me show you how the Trump administration is attempting to bend Harvard University to its will or cripple it if need be. What set the stage for Trump's assault on Harvard was actually an attack on a completely different Ivy League university.
The Trump administration canceling $400 million worth of grants and contracts for Columbia University.
Yes, Columbia would be made an example of, the front line in an accusation by the U.S. government of allowing anti-Semitism on campus, particularly when we saw that wave of pro-Palestinian encampments across American universities last year. Those protests were physically overwhelmingly nonviolent, but that's not to say they weren't ever perceived as hostile.
From the river to the sea, which many people interpret to mean the extermination of Israel.
And in this federal government news release from March this year, we can see these protests are core to its belief that elite universities like Harvard and like Columbia have allowed anti-Semitic harassment to spiral out of control. It cites potential violations of the Civil Rights Act, and it says ongoing harassment of Jews has completely paralyzed day-to-day campus operations. The follow-up, just 4 days after publishing that memo you just saw, the immediate cancellation of grants and contracts to Columbia University worth $400 million. Then came the Trump administration's demands. Among them, that Columbia should suspend or expel certain protesters, ban masks when they're not being worn for health reasons, adopt a new definition of anti-Semitism, and place the Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies departments under academic receivership. And these were just the preconditions to talk about Columbia University's continued financial relationship with the United States government. Columbia surrendered almost immediately.
They were things that, for the most part, the people who were running the school felt were, relatively reasonable. And they thought they could work it out. They were hoping not to get into a protracted fight and negotiate their way out of this box.
But Harvard was different. Where Columbia complied, Harvard resisted. And that made Trump push even harder. The Trump administration's demands of Harvard University were similar in a lot of ways to the demands made of Columbia: sweeping changes to governance, leadership, and admissions, reform of programs the Trump administration believes could be anti-Semitic, and a heavier hand when it comes to punishing students like protesters who break rules. But Harvard's answer was basically to write back and say, thanks, but we're good, and no thanks. Their exact words to the government: your letter disregards Harvard's efforts and instead presents demands that, in contravention of the First Amendment, invade university freedoms recognized by the Supreme Court. That's basically saying, giddy up, because we're lawyering up. So then came a series of very different demands. I'll show you the letter sent to Harvard by the Department of Homeland Security. Just 2 days after Harvard's response, a reprimand of Harvard's failure to condemn anti-Semitism, and then a brand new threat, this mention of the Student and Exchange Visitor Program. This changed everything because the Student and Exchange Visitor Program is what legally allows Harvard to attract and enroll students from outside the United States.
And the president of Harvard has said Harvard isn't Harvard without international students. It's a big part of their community. This isn't just sort of a side little group off to the side, and if it was cleaved off, no one would really notice.
So going back to this new request, this explicit threat against Harvard, it says your continued SEVP certification is contingent upon, and then it goes on to list a whole series of demands, all of them related to foreign students and revealing their entire disciplinary and legal histories. But I'll note one specific request near the end, requiring information on any foreign student's obstruction of the school's learning environment, which, once again, sounds a lot like it would include protesters.
What is worrisome that we're seeing with the Trump administration is really kind of having these ideological litmus tests. That's the troubling part, that we're going to push into a policing of ideas that really aren't about national security and safety, but they're about showing fidelity or bowing toward a current presidential administration.
And the Department of Homeland Security would eventually demand even more data, including video of international students engaged in protest or otherwise illegal activity spanning the last 5 years. By Harvard's account, in a lawsuit it just recently filed, it provided one batch of data to the government about 2 weeks after facing the threat of losing all of its international students. And about 2 weeks after that, it provided another batch of data. But then, on May 22nd, DHS lost all patience. The Department of Homeland Security deemed Harvard's responses insufficient and revoked Harvard's SEVP certification effective immediately. Translation: no more foreign students allowed. This here is from the head of the Department of Homeland Security. It is a privilege, not a right, for universities to enroll foreign students. Harvard had plenty of opportunity to do the right thing. It refused. Harvard might just be the most famous university in the world. Its gravitational pull, a big part of what makes Harvard what it is. I mean, hell, the future Queen of Belgium is a student at Harvard, for crying out loud. But international students are also an important source of revenue. This academic year, there were nearly 25,000 students at Harvard. Around 6,800 of them were from outside the United States, which means they are a quarter of the total student population. Now, I've gone through Harvard's financial statements to try to get the exact breakdown of how much tuition money the university makes specifically from international students compared to domestic, and I couldn't find it. I'm not sure they disclosed that number, and we've asked Harvard directly, but couldn't get an answer by the time we recorded this. But we can see very plainly from their balance sheets, they pulled in $1.4 billion US from students last year. That's about a fifth of their total operating revenue. And international students just have to be a huge part of that because they tend to pay more than domestic students and they tend to receive less financial aid. Bottom line, this is hundreds of millions of dollars annually that Harvard risks having to do without.
Those students who come in and pay tuition, they contribute to the financial well-being of the institution. But more importantly, being able to draw globally and nationally, that's part of what makes Harvard a special kind of institution.
Now, I mentioned earlier, Harvard has sued the US government. In the courts, a judge has sided with Harvard, temporarily reinstating its ability to enroll and keep foreign students.
Harvard is scoring a win against the Trump administration in court today. A federal judge has decided to keep blocking the ban indefinitely.
But again, this is temporary and could change. It could be different depending on when you watch this video. So the university is very much in the lurch, and not just because it stands to lose students. Harvard is the oldest university in the United States. In fact, it's older than the United States itself. And for more than 100 years, Washington and Harvard have had a financial relationship.
Since the 1950s, the post-World War II era, there has been a partnership between the federal government and higher education to advance research in this country, medical research, research in engineering, in space, in a variety of fields.
So for example, there's a $50,000 contract right now with the National Institutes of Health for a Harvard study into the effects of coffee drinking. Even the Department of Homeland Security, the branch of the government at war with Harvard, even it has a $26,000 contract with the university for senior executive training. The US government is now looking to cancel all such federal contracts. Their total estimated worth, $100 million. But also, it's instructed government agencies to go anywhere but Harvard for all future services. That's a big hit. An even bigger hit, though, is in government grants. In April, when Harvard first refused to give in to the government's demands, the government in turn froze more than $2.2 billion in federal funding that, according to the university, helped pay for things like cancer research, infectious disease modeling, innovations in quantum computing and AI, even the treatment of battlefield injuries.
It's not a gift. The research funding is given to universities and other research institutions to carry out research work that the federal government designates as high priority work.
And just this week, this post from Trump himself. I am considering taking $3 billion of grant money away from a very anti-Semitic Harvard and giving it to trade schools all across our land. Now, it's not clear to me whether this is $3 additional billion or if he's just approximately referring to what's already been frozen. But what is clear is that for the Trump administration, this is war, and there's still more damage the government can do. Part of Harvard's prestige comes from its immense wealth, and every Ivy League university does this, where they receive these huge donations from wealthy alumni and use them to invest in the stock market. And turns out, in Harvard's case, if you do this for like a couple hundred years, you end up with $53.2 million. Except, just kidding, these figures are all expressed in thousands. So this is actually $53 billion. They're rich, is what I'm saying. And for a long, long time, universities like Harvard benefited greatly from having to pay very little tax on the wealth they generate.
Their overall mission is education and serving the public good. And so that's why the federal government and many states grant tax-exempt status to colleges and universities that are private.
But in the ever-growing list of things Donald Trump can change, almost just by snapping his fingers, is exactly how much tax Harvard has to pay. Right now, Harvard is subject to a 1.4% endowment tax on their net investment income, which is tens of millions of dollars a year. But Republicans want to increase this number. Before J.D. Vance became vice president, he was a senator, and he introduced a bill that would have increased the endowment tax from 1.4% to 35%. Now, it doesn't look like the tax rate will get quite that high, but just this month, the Republican-controlled House did approve a plan that gets awfully close, 21% on university endowments. And that could cost a university like Harvard somewhere around $850 million every year.
Heavily taxing that endowment, you're going to undercut the ability over the long term for the institutions to sustain the kind of academic and scholarly programs that it's had before.
That will have a significant impact on their ability to carry out their mission. It won't do them in, but it will have a big impact.
Now, I've made the point before, and I'll make it again. Harvard is rich, but its wealth isn't infinite. Most of its $53 billion endowment, for example, is restricted. It can only use it for whatever donors said Harvard could use it for. And covering budget shortfalls or legal battles with the government isn't what most endowment money is for. And Trump doesn't look like he's done fighting.
What had been a rift between higher education and the Republican Party has developed into what's much more of a rupture now. This idea that, Harvard was like the crown jewel of our country and everybody wanted to go. There was an aspirational place that everybody sort of felt proud of. Now it's being looked at very differently.
So in a war with a US president seemingly intent on doing billions of dollars in damage, Harvard may not be able to hold out forever. Can Trump destroy it? Maybe not, but he can make it suffer.